procedures are safe and effective. And clinical trials bring about discoveries and information that improve public health and treatment in the future. So clinical trials take place in three main areas. The first one is government-funded clinical trials. The second one is industry-funded phase 1 to 3 clinical trials. And then there's industry-funded phase 4 clinical trials. An example of industry-funded clinical trials could be prescription drugs or special medical devices. Sometimes big pharma studies are thought to influence the outcomes of the studies, while government takes the profit out of it and allows the researchers to focus on the outcomes without worry of what the funder is seeking. So data shows us that approximately 3 to 5% of adults participate in clinical trials, and that the majority of those are white and female. And so I want you to think about this for just a moment. 3 to 5% of adults participate in clinical trials, and those for that, the majority are white and females. So why should we care about this? Well, ethnic minorities, poor, immigrant, refugee, elderly, sexual minorities have an unequal cancer and overall disease burden. African Americans represent 12% of the US population, but only 5% of clinical trial participants. Hispanics make up 16% of the population, but only 2 to 5% of the clinical trial participants. Asian American, Pacific Islander, American Indian, Alaska Natives, inclusion are inadequate. Minority participation uncovers, when minorities participate in these trials, we're going to be able to uncover a lot of the differences so that we may be able to make drugs and procedures important, safe, and effective. Potential ethnic and genetic differences in response to treatments and interventions are important. Again, adequate representation helps us to ensure that the safety and effectiveness of treatments are all studied in all people who will use the product once they are approved. So I don't know if you recognize the title of this book, The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks, but she is one of the main reasons why a lot of people aren't comfortable in participating in clinical trials. And I want to talk about this on the front so that you can think about this, and also not only about potentially your participation in clinical trials, but also anybody else you might know who could benefit from a clinical trial, but may be from an underrepresented community that actually participates. So when we think about so few communities of color participating, and I think we talked about it a little bit earlier, that we won't be able to get the medications together that are necessary to find cures. But there are also more important things to talk about. And those are the barriers that set themselves up that prevent people from coming in the first place. So there are several barriers that I'll discuss now. One is mistrust and comfort with the process. A lot of people have misconceptions about clinical trials. They have knowledge of the historical abuses of people of color. There's a lack of awareness of need, a lack of resources, and then just overall access barriers. So as I mentioned before, Henrietta Lacks is a great example of the historical abuse of people of color. If you haven't already heard about her, I really recommend that you get a copy of this book and read it from cover to cover. The story portrays several important bioethical issues, including informed consent, medical records privacy, communication with tissue donors, and research participants. In addition to the story of Henrietta Lacks, you can find out more information in the research studies about the 1932 Tuskegee study of untreated syphilis in the Negro male. This study was conducted without the benefit of the patient's informed consent. Researchers told the men that they were being treated for bad blood, a local term used to describe several ailments, including syphilis, anemia, and fatigue. The men did not receive the proper treatment needed to cure their illness. And in exchange for taking part in the study, the men received free medical exams, free meals, and burial insurance. While the investigation into ethics was conducted and a settlement was reached with the families, it has left a forever scar on our communities of color that resonates today. And these terrible mistakes have helped us to build a system of safety checks to ensure that our most vulnerable and underrepresented communities of color are not exploited. Research is still making mistakes, but we have an opportunity to be a voice that catches those mistakes and corrects them before any further harm is caused. So why do we need to be concerned about diversity in clinical trials? Again, just repeating what I said on the earlier slides, all populations experience illness and disease. Gender, race, ethnic origin, age, weight, and even where you live can lead to different responses to the same medication or treatment. And when medications or treatments are studied in only one group, doctors will not know whether it is safe or effective for everyone. So now that we've talked about the abuses in clinical trials and where they take place, now I want to transition into a conversation about the different types of clinical trials. So bear with me. So there are basically 4 different kinds of clinical trials. The first one is prevention trials. These look at disease risk and ways to reduce risk. We see a lot of this in dietary in healthy people. We heard a lot about it, the women's health study, the women's heart health study. It's like, how do we look at disease and how can we integrate fitness or diet into ways that can reduce the risk? And then we've got screening trials. These test new ways to find disease early when it may be more easily treated. I was actually a part of one of these screening trials here at City of Hope for a new Doppler to test whether or not your heart was working. And it was like an ultrasound that was connected to an iPhone. And it was really interesting. And what that would do, hopefully, if it's successful, would decrease the need for more expensive tools needed to monitor heart function. And then you have treatment trials. These test new treatments or new ways of using existing treatments. I have a friend who was just here yesterday, and he has cancer cells inside his perineal fluid. And so he's going to be part of a clinical trial that's going to infuse warm chemotherapy into his abdomen as an attempt to kill the cancer cells. So if these are successful and more people participate in these types of clinical trials, we would actually have a new standard of treatment for people with cancers in the hard to treat abdominal region. And then finally, we have quality of life or supportive care. These test ways to improve the comfort and well-being of people with illness or disease. So I'm going to go in a little bit more detail on these. So in treatment studies, participants in treatment studies already have cancer or the disease is being studied. And through these treatments, we're going to find the best ways to give treatment. It may include new drugs or combination drugs, surgery, radiation, medical devices, or other treatments. In prevention studies, again, participants are healthy, but are at risk for getting cancer or other diseases. We look to find ways to prevent cancer. And these studies can include lifestyle behaviors like healthy eating, exercise, including smoking. But these studies could also include medication, which leads us into precision medicine. So precision medicine is an initiative that looks at treatment and prevention and considers individual variability in their genes, their environment, and their lifestyle for each person. And so in precision medicine, patients with tumors that share the same genetic change, they receive the drug that targets that change, and no matter that type of cancer. So we talk a lot about that here at City of Hope in the bench to bedside, where we can do a genetic test, go back to the research who have been doing the studies on those particular genomes, and find the medications that can actually work for them. So now I'm going to turn it over to my friend Tiffany Gosha, and in a loud voice, Tiffany,
yes,
she's going to describe to you all the other phases of clinical trials. So Tiffany, to you, please.
Great. So hi everyone. Before we move on, I just wanted to make sure we were aware of the different phases of clinical trials. A clinical trial is only done when there is good reason to believe that a new test or treatment may improve the care of patients. Before clinical trials, tests and treatments were assessed in preclinical research. Preclinical research is not done with people. It assesses the features of a test or a treatment. For example, the research may aim to learn if a device is harmful to living tissue. Another aim may be to learn more about the chemical makeup of a drug. After preclinical research, tests, and treatments go through a series of clinical trials. Clinical trials assess if tests or treatments are safe for and work in people. So there's 5 phases of clinical trials. We're going to discuss them now. Phase 0, trials are the first clinical trials done among people. They aim to learn how a drug is processed in the body and how it affects the body. In these trials, a very small dose of drug is given to about 10 to 15 people. Phase 1 trials aim to find the best dose of a new drug with the fewest side effects. The drug will be tested in a small group of people, normally around 15 to 30 patients. Doctors start by giving very low doses of the drug to a few patients. Higher doses are given to other patients until side effects become too severe or a desired effect is seen. The drug may help patients, but phase 1 trials are to test a drug's safety and efficacy. If a drug is found to be safe enough, it can be tested in a phase 2 clinical trial. Now, bear with me as we discuss phase 2 clinical trials. Phase 2 trials further assess safety as well as if the drug works. The drug is often tested among patients with specific types of cancer. Phase 2 trials are done in larger groups of patients compared to phase 1 trials. Often new combinations of drugs are tested. Patients are closely watched to see if the drug works. However, the new drug is rarely compared to the current standard of care. Drug that is used. If a drug is found to work, it can be tested in a phase 3 clinical trial. So phase 3 clinical trials compare a new drug to the standard of care. These trials assess the side effects of each drug and which drug works better. Phase 3 clinical trials enroll 100 or more patients. Often, these trials are randomized. This means that patients are put into a treatment group called trial arms by chance. Randomization is needed to make sure that the people in all trial arms are alike. This lets scientists know that the result of the clinical trial are due to the treatment and not differences between the groups. A computer program is often used to randomly assign people to the trial arms. There can be more than 2 treatment groups in phase 3 trials. The control group gets the standard of care treatment. The other group gets a new treatment. Neither you nor your doctor can choose your group. You will also not know which group you're in until the end of the trial. Every patient in a phase 3 trial is watched closely. The study will be stopped early if the side effects of the new drug are too severe or if one group has much better results. Phase 3 clinical trials are often needed before the FDA will approve the use of a new drug for the general public. So now we're going to discuss phase 4 clinical trials. So phase 4 clinical trials test new drugs approved by the FDA. The drug is tested in several hundreds of thousands of patients. This allows for better research on short-lived and long-lasting side effects and safety. For instance, some rare side effects may only be found in large groups of people. Doctors can also learn more about how well the drug works and if it's helpful when used with other treatments. Sorry. Bear with me here. For example, the research may aim to learn if a device is harmful to living tissue. Another aim may be to learn more about the chemical makeup of a drug. After preclinical research, tests and treatments go through sorry, you know what? Sorry, I kind of got mixed up there.
So you're done. Let's just move to the next.
So we're gonna go on to our next trial. Our next slide, sorry. How do clinical trials work? So I'm gonna hand it over to Amy, and she's gonna tell you a bit more about how the clinical trials work.
It's not you.
I'm so sorry, that is still you.
Oh, okay, never mind.
I'm excited.
Okay, so let's now discuss how do clinical trials work. Before any clinical gets started, they must follow an approved plan, have guidelines about who can participate, have an independent oversight committee, have strict rules to protect the rights and safety of participants. These protections, these protections are put in place to protect participants and not cause any harm as was done in the past. Okay, so if researchers want to determine whether a certain behavior or medication works or how it works, they design their studies to have both a control group and an intervention group. Many experiments are designed to include a control group and one or more experimental groups. In fact, some scholars reserve the term experiment for study designs that include a control group. Ideally, the control group and the experimental group are identical in every way, except the experimental groups are subjected to treatments or interventions believed to have an effect on the outcome of interest, while the control group is not. Inclusion of a control group greatly strengthens researchers' ability to draw conclusions from a study. Indeed, only in the presence of a control group can a researcher determine whether a treatment under investigation truly has a significant effect on an experimental group, and the possibility of making an erroneous conclusion is reduced. Now let's talk about more about the control group versus treatment group. So we're going to look at this slide here, and we're going to illustrate the difference between a control group and the treatment, experimental, interventional group. So the control group gets water. So as you can see, the one on the left is getting some water, whereas the one on the right is getting water and fertilizer. This is the experimental group. The experimental group, so the researchers follow each group to study whether there are any differences between them. So one of them got water, one of them got water and fertilizer. So which one do you think is going to grow fastest? I think the one with water and fertilizer is going to grow bigger than one just water. All right, so there are many myths about clinical trials. Many people believe that a placebo is a pill or liquid that does not contain any medication. In prevention studies, it is possible to get a placebo. Treatment studies compare a new treatment to a standard treatment. Sometimes a standard treatment plus new treatment is compared to the standard treatment plus a placebo. Clinical trial participation is for patients who have not yet been treated, for those for whom standard treatments have not yet worked, and for those seeking different alternative care options. In view of historical abuses, it is important to note that every study participant can choose to withdraw even after having initially agreed to participate.
Yep.
Now we will look at the participants. Now we will look at how the participants are protected during these clinical trials. So there are safeguards put in place to protect the patients. All clinical trials have a moral obligation to protect participants. They require patients to have an informed consent. You must also treat patients humanely and ethically, and basic standard medical care is given always. Protection of, so now we're going to discuss what are possible benefits of clinical trial participation. So with this, you have an opportunity to learn and adopt healthy behaviors. You also have early access to new treatments, earlier access to health technology, early detection of disease or recurrence resulting in improved outcomes. So what are the possible risks of clinical trial participation, you ask? You may not directly benefit from the study. Multiple tests may be required, which may be inconvenient. You also may experience discomfort or unknown side effects, and may not get results back as quickly as you think. So what is an informed consent? It is a process in which a study volunteer, after learning about all the aspects of the trial, decides to and confirms willingness to participate. The informed consent document then summarizes the study purpose, linked tests, and how participant data will be used and stored. It also explains one's right as a research participant. It also provides information on risks, benefits, and alternative therapies. It outlines what to expect as a study participant, provides a reminder that participation is voluntary, and participants can choose to withdraw at any time. Additionally, every person has the right to receive study-related documents in their preferred language. Every person has the right to decide and agree to the requirements of the study. Every person who participates in research must have adequate knowledge and understanding before participating. Every person who participates in the clinical trial must provide informed consent. Now, I would like to pass it over to my friend Amy, Nurse Amy here. She's going to discuss more about biospecimens.
Thank you. Sorry, I was excited earlier. So biospecimens is just a fancy word for samples that we get during the clinical trials. So they can be hair, skin, urine, blood. They contain little bits of information regarding our genetic code, our DNA. They can tell us about our ancestry, possible exposures to toxins like lead. Most recently, especially where I work, they also help specify treatment. So you'll hear, you heard Nancy mention earlier the term precision medicine. So biospecimens can help find some information to help cater treatment to you specifically. So researchers get biospecimen through usually, usually through your doctor's appointment, your initial doctor's appointment, but they take tissue to help with diagnosing and treatment. Tissues donated specifically also for research purposes, that is optional. And then there's excess normal tissue that they can use as well. Extra tissue, tissue can be specifically donated for research such as cadavers, or just excess tissue in general can be collected. So these biospecimens are kept in places called repositories or biobanks. They store all of these, not just for transplants, and then informed consent on top of the informed consent within the trial is also required for the storage of the biospecimens. Donating to the biospecimens is 100% voluntary. You can choose not to have your tissue donated. Your tissue cannot be used without consent. And just like we mentioned earlier, you can always withdraw that at any time. You just have to let your team know. Some of the research in the past has been done, and some terrible things were done in the name of science. Because of this, there's new requirements that are put into place to ensure people like Henrietta's story doesn't happen again. If tissue is taken from participants, like I said, it's 100% voluntary and with their consent. Okay. This slide's a little small for me, so bear with me. But where do people hear about clinical trials? A lot of people will hear about them from their healthcare provider. So either their primary care physician or their specialist. They can also find out through educational programs, sometimes at the doctor's office or the local hospital. Of course, the internet is a big thing these days. People and patients also find out through patient advocacy or patient support groups. And they can even find out from programs presented at schools or colleges. If you would like to learn more about clinical trials, there is the clinicaltrials.coh.org website, or there's the clinicaltrials.gov These are really good sources because they're credible sources. Make sure you find credible sources, but you can also talk to your doctor, your nurse, any other healthcare provider about prevention, treatments, and clinical trials that are available. Okay, when deciding to join a clinical trial, ask yourself these questions. So ask about the research, learn about why it's being done and why you're being asked to volunteer. What would happen? You might want to find out what might the study do and how participating might affect you or anyone in the future with the same diagnosis as you. Ask for potential risks and what researchers will do to minimize them. Ask how your privacy, your PHI, and personal information will be protected. And then lastly, ask about the costs. Find out if there are any costs, if your insurance covers it, or if you have any out-of-pockets. These are some more clinical trial resources for you, a bunch of websites that you guys can have on there too. These are some websites that we have on biospecimen resources as well. There's so much information on the internet. So like I said, you want to make sure you're using credible sources. Below is a list of credible sources that you can include into your research, like the CDC, Centers for Disease Control, NIH, National Institute for Health, the FDA, Food and Drug Administration, the National Library of Medicine. Medline Plus is also a great way to help understand some of the different health topics.
All right. By magic, I'm coming right back into the screen. We have covered a lot during this presentation. And in a whole, we talked about how early research hurt our communities of color. Because of this harm, many will not participate in clinical research, which also does harm because research results cannot determine if a particular drug or program is effective in helping people of specific racial or ethnic communities. We also learned about the different kinds of clinical trials and rigorous standards that have been in place for safety for our participants. Now, we don't have time, but on the next slide, you might look at, there's a video that's available. It's on YouTube, but it pulls together all the questions and all the answers that you may have in regards to clinical trials. But what I'll do in the interest of time is move us forward to the next one. I'll stop sharing my screen and I'll open it up to any questions that you might have, and also let you know if you have any further questions, you can reach out to Tiffany Gosha. But in the meantime, if you don't mind, Amy, I'm going to turn it over to you for questions.
Yeah, of course.